Hello all, welcome back to the last session of the day, Regulatory Guidelines in the U.S. In this session, we'll discuss the food safety regulatory affairs of using HPP in the United States. Joining us, we have Dr. Vinicio Sarment Moreno. Vinicio has more than 11 years of experience related to industry and research in HPP. He is part of the Hiperbaric Food Applications and Processing team, where he provides technical advice to clients and potential buyers of HPP industrial equipment in the American continent. In addition, he is actively involved in research and technology dissemination efforts related to HPP food processing. I'd like to now welcome Vinicio for his presentation. The floor is yours, Vini.
Thank you, Anthony, for the introduction. And just glad to see over here you or the audience that made it through the end of day 4 of this certainly busy, but at the same time, exciting HP Innovation Week. So if you're standing or waiting right in front of the computer, just stand a bit, walk around, stretch. And if you still have something left in the tank, please join us in our session in which we will cover an overview of the regulations related to HPP foods in the United States and North America, Canada, and Mexico, briefly. Throughout the week, we have observed or learned how HPP is quite versatile, very novel technology that allows you to get into multiple food sectors with the same HPP equipment. So we have everything from the citrus or fruit jams, purees that started the HPP business back in the early 1990s in Japan, the commercial exponential growth phase that started with avocado products here in the United States, meat products in Europe, late 1990s, early 2000s, and ever since, again, you can see a little bit of everything in the market. Juices and beverages, which is now the widest sector, closely followed up by the HPP tolling, and again, you have fresh salsas, hummus, ready-to-eat meals, seafood, dairy, and now the hot topic, one of the fastest growing markets, it's the pet food. So in all, back in 2019, we estimated that the global productions for all HPP food sectors around the world close to 4,000 million pounds. And most outstandingly, that in terms of more than 30 years of commercial existence, there has not been any foodborne outbreaks related to HPP foods, and we would like to keep it that way. Still, there's still no clear regulations or very specific regulations for HPP foods. Rather, particularly in the United States, there are certain regulations dedicate special sections for guidance in HPP, but very brief overall. And in case that there's lacking regulations, that you can always follow up with food safety objectives that are conventionally used throughout the world. In examples for raw foods, the target food safety objective will be somewhere between 5 to 7 raw reductions. This is because when you go into the market and get some raw foods, raw produce, raw fish, raw meats, you expect the microbial count, including the pathogens, to be around 3 to 4 logs, which will be 1,000 to 10,000 cells. So less of these products will be available with a 5 log or 100,000 cells concentration. This is because when you go beyond this point to 6 or 7 logs, your food spoilage becomes already noticeable, and it is less likely that consumers buy spoiled food. So that's one of the reasons by which 5 log reductions is conventionally used as a standard for food safety. And when you have a higher risk, when the infection risk by some of the pathogens is higher, you can actually have up to 7 log reductions for some regulations. Conversely, cooked meats, foods, or in which HPP is combined with other steps such as fermentation, these other steps provide an additional reduction, so the risk is minor, and you usually target between 1 to 3 log reductions. So for the cooked foods, an example, the cooking step might actually take away or achieve the 5 log reductions of the pathogens cooking a soup. But when you transfer the food from the kettle into the packaging or have some other equipment to transfer, you can actually recontaminate the food with ever-lurking Listeria monocytogenes, an example, and that's what you can get again the pathogens within your food. So HPP helps you in that regard as a either lethal step or post-lethal intervention. And then again, these lethality values are just a brief of an overview guidance. You should always consult the outstanding regulations of the country in which you are processing or the one you expect to export. And that in order to comply with food regulations throughout the world, food safety institutions require validations, and that's responsibility for each processor. In case that you're not familiar with the term log reductions or the validation studies, we had a couple of sessions on Monday and yesterday, and well, in case that you missed them, the sessions, you can request access through our marketing team here at marketing@hyperbaric.com. So in all, in these sessions, we also learned how pressure level is the factor that has the major influence in terms of microbial or pathogen reduction. The range for most commercial applications would be 5,000 to 6,000 bar, which would be 72,000 to 87,000 psi. Whole pressure holding times between 1 through 6 minutes. And that as you get into the higher pressure levels, the holding time can actually be shorter. So it's beneficial, particularly for HPP, in which it's a batch processing and you want to keep cycle times at a minimum. So jumping up into the regulations, we'd start with Food Safety Modernization Act, which was dictated by former President Barack Obama, in order to match food safety regulations with the current complexity of a global food industry. So all in all, well, they emphasize or continue to emphasize in terms of preventing rather than being reactive when it comes to food safety. And over here in the guidelines or for preventive controls for human food, this guidance that's freely available on this link below. They have specific sections for the HPP. Over here, preventive controls. You have a brief introduction, description of the technology. And over here in chapter 5, it's a summary of what the applications of HPP will be for food safety. So it will be focused on activating mostly vegetative microorganisms, such as Listeria, E. coli, Salmonella, can actually also reduce the risk associated with some viruses, parasites. And it also enlists the limitation that HPP does not eliminate bacterial spores and doesn't eliminate bacterial toxins as well. So this is just a very generic guidance. Now going into more specific food sectors, well, you have the FDA-Juice HACCP, which states that the intervention step will require to be or yield a fly log reductions of pertinent pathogens, which can be Listeria, E. coli, Salmonella, Cristoporidium parvum, the parasite if it's apple juice, and well, HPP is capable of eliminating all these pathogens. It also shares that for low acid foods, pertinent pathogens become spore former Clostridium botulinum, and as stated before, HPP does not eliminate bacterial spores. In such case, well, you can either add additional ingredients barriers that prevent the growth of Clostridium botulinum, and the easiest way in this case is to take advantage of the acidic nature of fruits to lower down that pH and act as a natural barrier. So over here in the section 5.33, you have that they enlist that, again, what we just saw at the beginning of the presentation, pressure level and holding time will be your critical parameters that need to be validated. And it also talks of both for the conventional batch processes, which is the conventional HPP equipments, the impact equipments, and semi-continuous equipment, such as the novel technology developed by Hiperbaric, the Hiperbaric Vault, which we also covered in Tuesday in one of our sessions. For ready-to-eat meals or foods, there's such as avocado products, guacamole, hummus. There's no specific section for the HPP. So they just enlist that any lethal step targeting pathogen Listeria monocytogenes should target either 5 or 6 log reductions, depending on the initial load you expect for Listeria. And authorities are always flexible, so they are always willing to help, they're always willing to approach. They have done a terrific job in developing this and other guidelines, so always consult them, always get in touch with them. And over here you can see that they also allow or might consider lesser log reductions if appropriately validated or established. In addition to the validation study, which is always recommended for all processors regardless, but they have the options also to use scientific studies, historical data, mathematical modeling, again based on science facts, usually published references. The hard thing about published references is that they need to match exactly the conditions that you use in your facility. So it needs to be similar industrial equipment, needs to be a similar formulation, similar packaging, and that in fact is somewhat hard to find in literature, despite that there's lots of information available. Likewise, all the previous steps that you use to prepare the foods are not similar even among processors elaborating the same product. So again, it is always recommended for you to carry over the validation study to validate your assumptions and HPP conditions. For seafood, we have the Seafood HACCP. Again, all the links over here freely to download right here below on each slide. It kind of briefly covers HPP assays for shocking to recover 100% edible meat from bivalves such as oysters, clams, crustaceans such as lobsters, and also as a shelf life extension step. And again, it makes an emphasis that regarding those food steps or products in which you do not completely eliminate Clostridium botulinum, and again, the inability of HPP to eliminate bacterial spores. So milk is actually very interesting because it was actually among the first food products studied under high pressure back in 1890 in the West Virginia University by B.W. Hyde, Dr. B.W. Hyde. Still, there's not much commercial products in the market. There's, in terms of milk, it's available in Mexico over here by Villa de Patos or Villa de Patos, in Australia by Made by Cow, achieving between 21 to 45 days. But the challenges here in the USA, it's related to the validation. So for starters, the pertinent pathogens might not be on not only Listeria monocytogenes, but the parasite Coxiella burnetii. So that in particular, the parasite needs a host, a live host, in order to determine if the parasite can actually infect the host. So you need to use or infect rodents such as mice, guinea pigs, in order to determine whether HPP is effective. And that notably brings up the cost associated with a validation study. In addition to that, well, you need to monitor for Listeria monocytogenes and some other pathogens that might be actually to determine whether Listeria or Coxiella is actually the more resistant. So it might include validation for Salmonella, Campylobacter, spores, Bacillus cereus. Again, under current commercial HPP conditions, from 40 to 75 Fahrenheit, 4 to 25 Celsius, you do not eliminate spores, but Hiperbaric has developed an approach that will make feasible the combination of mild or high temperatures. In the case of milk, it will approximately hit between 50 to 60 Celsius, and that in those conditions you can actually eliminate bacterial spores. So feel free to reach out if you're interested in this approach. Going into the hot topic, well, FDA is also in charge of the pet food or food for companion animals. Over here, they also have specific section in which they talk about HPP technology. And again, validation is required regardless or particularly for pet food. So it clearly states that if you plan to use HPP, you need to validate for pathogens we already talked about: Salmonella, Listeria, E. coli, when applied Clostridium species, and Toxoplasma gondii, the parasite as well. And again, you need to make sure that you validate the pressure time combinations in which that you plan to apply. So carrying over with meat, but for human consumption, it takes now under the USDA, in which FC's Directive 6120 enlists all the parameters we just talked about: pressure level, holding time, sometimes water temperature can be considered, or the temperature of the product can be considered a critical control point and needs to be assessed as well. And in this case, you can see the minimum expected lethalities for raw meats would be fibro reductions for Listeria. The same applies for E. coli and Salmonella, except Salmonella in poultry, in which a 7 log reduction is required. This directive also enlists that the HPP can be used as an extension step, but you need to justify the reductions of these pathogens by other means. For ready-to-eat meats, well, the HPP can be used as a post-lethal intervention in which the product, the sliced meat, sits in its final plastic packaging, run through the HPP, and as a lethal treatment must achieve at least 1 log reduction, preferably 2, and validate this accordingly. Else, well, HPP can be combined with some other process or antimicrobial compound that will not allow the recovery of listeria through the storage. So preferably not allow more than 1 log of growth, and or between 1 or 2. So this is lots of resources, and it's just focusing on the part of the HPP in terms of the lethal steps for or lethal reduction of pathogens. But there's much more around the food safety regarding good manufacturing practices, standard operating procedures for cleaning, sanitizing, etc. So it is highly recommended that you take some training. We always recommend to take any courses available that are in person, because, well, you get people from all over the place with different viewpoints, different experiences, but that you can also get ahead and start reading some of this literature, which is freely available. In example, there's this training curriculum available for the juice and fish HACCP programs, and for a moderate price, you also have the preventive controls for human food manual and for you to explore. In Canada, well, not just long ago, in 2017, I guess, Canada does not longer consider HPP as a novel intervention. So prior to that, every new product, in example, the first HPP use, need to go through the government, through Health Canada, to establish whether HPP induced any changes in terms of not only achieve the food safety objectives, but determine whether it induced any changes in terms of formation of toxic compounds, migration of plastics into the food, and of course, HPP has nicely went over these trials, not only in Canada, but throughout the world. And again, nowadays, HPP is not considered novel. It still requires validation, again, throughout the world. And the only case we'll hear over here for Canada will be those for ready-to-eat meats, or for hams, in example, poultry meat as well, that in this case, applying the 87,000 PSI treatment with a 3-minute holding time, it's being considered validated to achieve at least 3 log reductions for listeria. So in this case, it's not necessarily required. Now going into Mexico, well, actually just to make sure or mention that North America, comprising United States, Canada, Mexico, are by far the largest HPP region around the world, with nearly 50% of installed HPP capacity. And Mexico actually is perhaps the second country with the most HPP units installed, followed by Canada and some countries in Europe. But in this case, you can see, well, you don't see, but sorry, I missed that. But in Mexico, there's currently no clear regulation regarding HPP foods, so they just try to follow FDA guidelines at times, make sure that they comply with current outstanding regulations. And most of the products they use, it would be 60% of the installed capacity. It's intended for avocado products export to the United States. But there's also been significantly growth in terms of the juice and beverage sector and HPP tolling, which will be closely related to the juice and beverages, or other products such as fruits, purees that they export to Asia as well. So again, there's no clear regulation, so try to follow preferably FDA guidelines. Now we're quickly jumping and see how HPP can fall into your HACCP plan. First, just a screenshot over here from the software used by our units in order to program the HPP cycles. Again, the critical parameters would be the pressure level, holding times. Sometimes, in very rare occasions, you can use back-to-back cycles, multiple cycles, in order to meet a food safety standard, so that can be also programmed as well. Water temperature of the water going into the HPP unit is usually not considered a critical control point, at least for those processes taking place at chilled or ambient temperature, but it will become a critical control point, the temperature inside the canisters or the food, when you combine this with mild or high temperature, the technology that has been developed by Hiperbaric. And well, just that all these parameters will be measured in real time through the SCADA, Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition System. So overall, for pressure, you want to keep it at the minimum. The pressure level that you use for your validation study should preferably always be above. In this case, the intensifiers or high pressure pumps will always start when before, in example, if you're processing at 6,000 bars, intensifiers will bring pressure slightly over this value, 6,030 bars. And just as the pressure level slightly drops to or comes close to 6,000, intensifiers resume and will inject an extra water jet in order to keep pressure always at above this level and maximize the operation. So pressure is monitored by two transducers, which are placed on both ends of the discharge sides for the HPP unit. And again, this is monitored through in real time with the SCADA. So we all will obviously have alarms in case that you have overpressure, which rarely, if ever, occurs. You also have an elongate system that measures the elongation of the yoke. The yoke is just a big metal frame that keeps the plugs and wedges in place when you apply the high pressure. And again, it's something that's being recorded in real time. Holding time, well, you need also to make sure that that the pressure level remains and during the holding time specified in your validation study. Typically 180 seconds or 3 minutes is being used as a standard for the HPP. So you need to maintain the 87,000 psi or 6,000 bars at least for 3 minutes or above, if those are the conditions that you validated. If you by any chance, if you're not have a pressure drop below the established level, if there's a piece that's actually close to its end in terms of the lifespan, if you are not doing a correct preventive maintenance, you can have these pressure drops in case of a leak. But in this case, the software gets you covered because when you drop below the pressure level that's been specified in the validation study, the timer automatically stops and it will only resume once you are over that pressure level. So it will always make sure that you meet the 1 through 6 minutes, the 3 minutes, which is kind of the standard or the time that's been validated in your study. So again, there's no need to worry about that. And again, this is monitored real time through the software unit. Temperature, again, might not necessarily be a critical control point. For hyperbaric units, you need to just keep range between the 5 to 25 Celsius, the 40 to 75 Fahrenheit. And you can only control this for the water that's being pushed into the vessel. You cannot actually control the temperature of the water inside the vessel. So for every cycle, this is what you get. A couple of reports. Over here you can see the plot, which states or measures through the water temperature, the pressure level. You can see the pressure come-up time, the pressurization, which is instantaneous. More information regarding the water inlet temperature, whether if you added which operator is using the unit, the time in which the cycle starts, the recipe, conditions used, and you can also have a summary of all the cycles throughout the day, throughout the whatever, how many years you're already been processing. You can have them recorded in the SCADA system, and again, it always report the time in which you are above the established pressure level in the recipe, whether the cycle went okay, and many other features that you can actually tailor. In example, the number of units that each basket carries, the number of baskets that go into the unit. So all this traceability that will make life easier for all of those of you who are out there in production. So this is all by my end. Just a reminder, I'm just part of the application staff that will guide you through, will help you through with anything related to HPP food processing and packaging as well. If you have any questions, you can contact me at apps@hyperbaric.com. I hope you enjoyed the session, and well, just before you leave, actually just a reminder that tomorrow we will be traveling around the world to get the updates for each region. So we start early with Oceania, traveling west towards Asia, Middle East, Africa, Europe, Latin America, and we close out in the USA, where the panelists will be providing the insights, their thoughts on how COVID-19 changed the landscape for the HPP and overall for the food industry, and what can be expected or foreseen for 2022 and beyond. So thank you again for joining us. We hope to see you tomorrow in the last day of this exciting HPP Innovation Week, and have a wonderful day.